Get that file out of my face before I decide that your presence is a threat to national security rather than a medical necessity, Doctor." The voice rasped from the shadows, low and vibrating with a suppressed, lethal kinetic energy that made the sterile air of the VIP suite feel thin and dangerous. "Nurse Zandria, Andy." Vance paused at the threshold, her hand hovering over the biometric scanner, listening to the silence that followed the threat. It wasn't the shout of a temper tantrum. It was the quiet, calibrated warning of a weapon with a hair trigger. Inside, Dr. Gawain Stonecliffe, the chief of orthopedic trauma, actually stepped back, his polished loafers squeaking against the linoleum, a sound of fear that echoed louder than any scream in the prestigious corridors of the Naval Medical Center. This was the lion's den, and Zandria had just volunteered to walk in wearing nothing but scrubs and a stethoscope. The hallways of the Ravenwell wing were not designed for comfort, they were designed for containment. The architecture was sharp, brutalist, and efficient, echoing the temperament of the men and women who usually occupied its beds. But room 404 was different. It had become a legend in the hospital, a black hole where nursing careers went to die. Zandria Vance adjusted the collar of her scrub top, her fingers brushing the laminated ID badge that marked her as a provisional RN. She was 24, with eyes the color of stormy Atlantic water, and a resume that looked deceptively thin. She didn't have the decades of experience held by the matrons who ran the ICU, nor the political savvy of the shift supervisors. What she had was a mortgage on a small house for her younger sister, and a desperate need for the hazard pay attached to this specific assignment. "You're making a mistake, Vance," head nurse Winifred Hale said, leaning against the nurse's station counter. Winifred was an institution herself, a woman carved from granite and cynicism, who had seen 3 wars and 1,000 broken bodies. She didn't look at Zandria. She looked at the digital roster where Zandria's name was currently blinking next to Crestford, Eldridge, CDR. The man isn't a patient. He's a jagged piece of shrapnel that hasn't stopped moving. "I heard the last nurse left in tears," Zandria said, keeping her voice neutral. She was organizing her cart. Saline flushes, fresh gauze, a tablet with the classified medical history she had only been granted access to an hour ago. "Tears? Honey, the last nurse requested a transfer to a listening post in Alaska," Winifred scoffed, finally turning her gaze to the rookie. "Commander Crestford has undergone 7 surgeries in 3 weeks. His leg is held together by titanium and willpower. His back is a mess of fused vertebrae. He is in excruciating constant pain, and he refuses to take the edge off because he doesn't trust the fog. He treats the staff like enemy combatants." "Dr. Stonecliffe says he's stabilizing," Zandria noted. "Stonecliffe cares about the metrics," Winifred countered sharply. "He cares that the surgeries were technically successful. He doesn't care that the patient is psychologically dissecting anyone who walks in the room. Crestford is a SEAL, Vance. Team leader. Highly decorated. He's used to controlling every variable. Lying in that bed, unable to walk, he feels powerless. And a man like that will burn the world down just to prove he can still strike a match." Zandria nodded, absorbing the warning but not accepting the defeat. "Does he have family? Anyone visiting?" Winifred hesitated, a rare flicker of softness crossing her hardened face before the mask slammed back down. "Admiral Ravenwell comes by. That's it. And when the Admiral visits, the temperature in the room drops 10 degrees. It's not a family visit. It's a debriefing for a failed asset. Just go in, change the dressings, check the vitals, and get out. Don't speak unless spoken to. Do not look him in the eye if he's agitated. And for the love of God, Vance, do not touch his personal effects." Zandria took a deep breath, picking up the tray. "I'll keep that in mind." "1 week," Winifred called out as Zandria walked away. "That's the record. 3 days is the average. Don't unpack your locker too much." Approaching room 404, the air grew heavier. 2 MPs stood guard at the end of the hall, a reminder that Eldridge Crestford wasn't just a patient. He was a repository of state secrets. Zandria swiped her badge. The light turned green. She walked in just as Dr. Stonecliffe was backing away. Stonecliffe was a tall, imposing man who wore his white coat like a royal robe. He was brilliant, arrogant, and currently looked flushed. "Commander, the protocol requires," Stonecliffe began, his voice tight. "The protocol requires me to be functional, Doctor." The man in the bed cut him off. Eldridge Crestford was sitting up, despite the strict orders to remain supine. Even surrounded by pillows and hooked to 3 different monitors, he looked dangerous. He was broad-shouldered, his body a map of scars and fresh sutures. His dark hair was overgrown, shadowing a face that was strikingly handsome, but marred by exhaustion and a ferocious, burning anger. "Nurse!" Stonecliffe barked, relieved to have a distraction. "This is Nurse Vance. She will be handling your post-op care for this rotation." Eldridge didn't look at her. His eyes, dark and piercing, remained fixed on the surgeon. "Another one? What is this, Stonecliffe? A war of attrition? You think if you send enough fresh meat into the grinder, I'll eventually surrender and let you dope me up?" "I think you need care, Commander," Stonecliffe snapped, regaining his composure. "Nurse Vance is capable. Nurse, check his drain output and redress the lumbar incision. I will return when the Admiral arrives." Stonecliffe exited the room as if escaping a burning building. The door clicked shut, leaving Zandria alone with the wolf. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The only sounds were the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen line, which Eldridge had pulled away from his nose, and the steady beep of the cardiac monitor. Zandria didn't announce herself. She didn't offer a cheery, "Good morning." She walked to the sink, washed her hands with methodical precision, and snapped on gloves. She approached the bed, stopping at the foot. "I need to check the incision on your leg, Commander," she said, her voice calm, devoid of the trembling fear he was used to hearing. Eldridge turned his head slowly. For the first time, he looked at her. It felt like being scanned by a targeting system. "You look like you should be in a high school homeroom, not a trauma ward. How old are you?" "Old enough to know that if that drain backs up, you'll go septic," Zandria replied, stepping to the side of the bed. "And young enough to have steady hands. Lift the sheet, please." Eldridge stared at her, a flicker of surprise breaking through the hostility. He didn't move. "And if I don't?" "Then I'll have to call the orderlies to restrain you so I can do it," Zandria lied smoothly. She knew Stonecliffe wouldn't authorize restraints for a VIP unless he was violent, but she gambled on Eldridge's pride. "And I imagine having 3 men hold you down while a high school student changes your bandages isn't how you want to spend your Tuesday." Eldridge held her gaze for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Then, with a scoff that might have been a laugh or a growl, he kicked the sheet aside with his uninjured leg. "You won't last till Friday," he muttered. "We'll see," Zandria said, and began her work. By the 3rd day, the war of attrition was in full swing, but the battle lines had shifted in ways neither combatant had expected. Eldridge Crestford was a nightmare patient. He refused pain medication, meaning his blood pressure was constantly spiking from agony. He refused physical therapy from Isoria, the hospital's top PT specialist, claiming her methods were patronizing. He threw a meal tray against the wall when the kitchen sent him flavorless broth for the 5th time. But Zandria Vance hadn't left. She had developed a strategy, efficiency and silence. She didn't try to comfort him. She didn't ask about his trauma. She simply anticipated his needs before he could articulate them, removing the humiliation of him having to ask for help. When he was thirsty, the water was there. When the sun glared in his eyes, the blinds were already drawn. However, the tension broke on Thursday afternoon. Zandria entered the room to find Eldridge sweating profusely, his knuckles white as he gripped the bed rails. The monitors showed his heart rate at 130. He was grey, his breathing shallow. "Commander!" She moved quickly to the bedside. "Don't!" he gritted out, his teeth clenched. "Just leave it." "You're in a level 9 pain crisis," Zandria observed, checking the display. "Your body is going into shock. I'm pushing the morphine." "No!" The command was a whip crack. He lashed out, his hand catching her wrist. His grip was iron despite his weakness. "No morphine, no opioids." "You are tearing your sutures with this tension," Zandria argued, not pulling away, though his grip hurt. "Why? Why suffer like this?" "Because I need to think," Eldridge roared, the facade cracking. "Admiral Ravenwell is coming at 1600 hours. If I am drugged, if I am sliding in and out of consciousness, he will sign the discharge papers. He will retire me. I cannot be retired. I have unfinished business." Zandria looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the desperation behind the rage. He wasn't being difficult for sport. He was fighting for his professional life. To a Navy SEAL, losing his status was a death worse than physical expiration. "If you don't lower your heart rate, Stonecliffe will sedate you anyway," Zandria said quietly. "He watches the telemetry from the station. If you stay above 130 for another 5 minutes, he'll come in here with a syringe of haloperidol and knock you out until tomorrow." Eldridge's eyes widened slightly. He knew she was right. I can't control it. The pain is—" He trailed off, shuddering. Zandria made a decision. It was a violation of Dr. Stonecliffe's standing orders, which were strictly pharmacological. Treat pain with drugs. Treat agitation with sedation. "Let go of my wrist," she said firmly. He released her. Zandria moved to the wall and unplugged the telemetry transmitter. The central monitor at the nurse's station would show a signal lost error, common enough with faulty leads that it would buy them 5 minutes before anyone came to check. "What are you doing?" Eldridge asked, confused. "Buying you time to get your heart rate down without drugs," she said. She went to the specialized cryotherapy machine in the corner, a device Stonecliffe had dismissed as ineffective holistic nonsense compared to narcotics. Zandria had read about its efficacy for nerve damage in a European medical journal the night before. She grabbed the cooling cuffs. "This is going to freeze the nerve endings. It's distinct from ice. It shocks the system into a reset. It hurts for 10 seconds. Then it goes numb. Totally numb. No fog in your head." Stonecliffe said no auxiliary therapies, Eldridge warned, though he didn't stop her. "Stonecliffe isn't in this room," Zandria said, applying the cuffs to his thigh and lumbar region. "I am. Trust me." She activated the machine. Eldridge hissed, arching his back as the intense cold hit him. He groaned, a guttural sound of distress. "Breathe," Zandria commanded, stepping close to his head. "Look at me. Eldridge. Look at me." It was the first time she had used his first name. It snapped his attention to her. Her grey eyes were locked on his. "Focus on the cold. It's just sensation. It's not damage. Breathe in. 2, 3, out. 2, 3. She paced his breathing, her voice a metronome. For a minute, it was just the two of them in the dim room, the machine humming. Slowly, the lines of agony on his face smoothed out. The rigid tension in his shoulders dropped. "It's stopped," he whispered, disbelief coloring his tone. The fire in the leg. It's gone. Numb, Zandria corrected. Your head is clear? Crystal, he said, testing his mental acuity. He looked at her, really seeing her for the second time. You unplugged the monitor. Lead must have fallen off, she shrugged, moving to plug it back in. I'll make a note to maintenance. As the monitor flickered back to life, it displayed a heart rate of 88. The door opened. Dr. Stonecliffe swept in, looking suspicious. Nurse Vance? The telemetry dropped out. Is the patient stable? Zandria turned, her face a mask of professional innocence. Just a loose lead, Doctor. I reattached it. Commander Crestford is resting comfortably. Vitals are stable. Stonecliffe looked at the monitor, then at Eldridge. The commander was lying back, pale but composed, his eyes sharp and alert. Very well, Stonecliffe grunted, disappointed he didn't get to assert authority. Admiral Ravenwell is here. As Stonecliffe turned to hold the door, Eldridge caught Zandria's eye. He gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a thank you. It was an acknowledgement of a co-conspirator. She hadn't just lasted the week. She had entered the alliance. The victory was short-lived. Friday night brought a storm that rattled the reinforced windows of the medical center. Zandria was on the night shift, a double she had picked up to cover for a nurse who had called in sick, or perhaps one who just wanted to avoid the Ravenwell wing. Around 0200 hours, the hospital was quiet, save for the hum of ventilation. Zandria was at the station, charting, when the alarm for room 404 screamed. It wasn't a cardiac arrest. It was the movement sensor. Zandria sprinted down the hall. She burst into the room to find a chaotic scene. Eldridge had attempted to get out of bed. He was on the floor, tangled in the sheets and IV lines, dragging himself toward the window. "Commander!" She rushed to him, dropping to her knees. He was thrashing, his eyes wide but unseeing. He was shouting coordinates, barking orders to a squad that wasn't there. A flashback. The sedative Stonecliffe had prescribed for sleep had reacted poorly with his exhaustion, triggering a dissociative episode. "Ambush! Left flank! Get down!" Eldridge roared, swinging his arm wildly. He struck the bedside table, sending a glass pitcher shattering to the floor. Shards of glass scattered everywhere. Zandria dodged the flailing limb. "Eldridge, you are at Bethesda. You are safe." He didn't hear her. He was back in the sandbox, or the jungle, or wherever he had lost his men. He tried to stand on his ruined leg. If he put weight on it, he would shatter the reconstructive work Stonecliffe had spent 10 hours performing. He would lose the leg. "Help! I need help in here!" Zandria yelled toward the open door, but the MPS were at the far end of the corridor. Eldridge pushed himself up, screaming in agony as pressure hit the limb. Zandria didn't think. She lunged forward, not to restrain him, but to brace him. She wedged her shoulder under his armpit, taking his weight. He was heavy, dense with muscle, and he nearly crushed her against the floor. "I've got you," she grunted, straining against his mass. "I've got you, Ridge. Stand down." "They're coming," he gasped, sweat dripping from his face, his eyes frantic. "Can't move. Can't move." "You don't have to move," Zandria said, her voice piercing the hallucination. She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "The perimeter is secure. Do you hear me? The perimeter is secure. I am on watch." Something in the military phrasing penetrated the fog. He blinked, the wildness receding slightly. "Secure?" "Secure," she affirmed. "You are relieved of watch, Commander. Stand down." He sagged against her, the adrenaline crashing. Zandria struggled to lower him gently to the floor rather than letting him collapse. They ended up sitting amidst the shattered glass and tangled wires, Eldridge leaning heavily against her, his breathing ragged. The lights flicked on. "Doctor." Stonecliffe stood in the doorway, flanked by Winifred and the two MPs. Stonecliffe looked at the scene, the broken glass, the patient on the floor, the nurse holding him in a way that looked far too intimate for the sterile environment of a hospital. "What in God's name is happening here?" Stonecliffe demanded. Eldridge groaned, clutching his leg. Blood was seeping through the bandages. He had torn a stitch, but the bone seemed intact. Patient experienced a night terror and attempted to ambulate, Zandria said breathlessly, checking Eldridge's pulse. "I intervened to prevent orthopedic failure." "You should have sedated him immediately," Stonecliffe yelled, stepping over the glass. "He could have crippled himself for life. You broke protocol, Vance. You are supposed to call for restraints the moment agitation begins." "There wasn't time," Zandria shot back, her protective instinct flaring. "He would have snapped the tibia before the orderlies got here. Get him back in bed," Stonecliffe ordered the MPS. "Check the leg." He turned his cold gaze to Zandria. "And you, Nurse Vance, report to my office. Immediately," Eldridge hissed as the MPS lifted him. He reached out, grabbing Zandria's scrub top. "Wait." Stonecliffe ignored him. "Now, Vance." Zandria pulled away gently from Eldridge's grasp. "I'll be fine," she whispered to him, though she wasn't sure. She walked out of the room, her knees shaking. She had saved his leg, and likely his career, by physically catching a 200-pound seal in the middle of a PTSD episode. But in doing so, she had engaged physically with a patient in a manner that violated safety standards, bypassed the chemical restraint protocol, and challenged the chief of surgery. As she walked toward Stonecliffe's office, she saw Winifred watching her. The older nurse wasn't gloating. She looked impressed and worried. "You lasted the week," Winifred murmured as Zandria passed. "But you might not last the night." Inside room 404, Eldridge Crestford lay in the wreck of his bed, the pain returning with a vengeance. But for the first time in weeks, the anger was gone, replaced by a singular, focused thought. She had caught him. When everyone else wanted to tie him down or knock him out, she had caught him. And nobody fired a member of his team, not without a fight. The office of Dr. Gawain Stonecliffe was a shrine to his own ego. Diplomas in heavy mahogany frames lined the walls like hunting trophies, and the view behind his expansive desk overlooked the dark, churning Potomac River. Zandria stood in the center of the Persian rug, her hands clasped behind her back, trying to stop them from trembling. "You are reckless, Nurse Vance," Stonecliffe said, not looking up from the incident report he was signing with a fountain pen that likely cost more than Zandria's car. "You engaged physically with a Tier 1 operator in a fugue state. You bypassed the pharmacological protocols established by this department, and you undermined my authority in front of military police." "I prevented a compound fracture of a surgically reconstructed femur," Zandria replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "If I had waited for the orderlies, Commander Crestford would be back in the OR right now, facing amputation. And if he had snapped your neck—" Stonecliffe looked up, his eyes cold behind rimless glasses. "Then I would be filling out a coroner's report instead of a termination notice." The word hung in the air. Termination. Head nurse Winifred Hale, standing by the door like a silent sentinel, finally spoke. "Gawain, be reasonable." She saved the leg. The MPs confirmed it. The patient was thrashing. She used her body as a splint. "She acted like a cowboy," Stonecliffe sneered. "This unit requires precision, not heroics. Nurse Vance, surrender your badge. You are relieved of duty effective immediately. Security will escort you to your locker." Zandria felt the blood drain from her face. Her sister's tuition, the mortgage, it all evaporated in the scratch of Stonecliffe's pen. She reached for her badge, her fingers numb. Suddenly, the intercom on Stonecliffe's desk buzzed. It was the red line. the direct link to the VIP suites. "Doctor!" The voice of the MP from the hallway crackled through, sounding breathless. "You need to get down here. The commander, he's tearing the place apart." Stonecliffe paled. "Is he having another episode?" "No, sir. He's lucid, and he's barricaded the door. He says he has a hostage situation." "A hostage?" Stonecliffe stood up, knocking his chair back. "Who is in there with him?" "No one, sir. He says he is the hostage, and he's refusing to let anyone in, except the rookie." Stonecliffe's gaze snapped to Zandria. A vein throbbed in his temple. He looked at the termination paper, then at the terrified nurse, then at the door. "If you go in there," Stonecliffe hissed, pointing a finger at her, "and he hurts you, the Navy will bury the lawsuit before your family even knows you're dead. Do you understand?" Zandria clipped her badge back onto a scrub top. "I understand that my patient needs me, Doctor." She turned and walked out, Winifred following close behind. As they reached the elevator, the older nurse leaned in. "He just played an ace for you, Vance. Don't waste it." When Zandria arrived at room 404, the corridor was swarming. Tactical response teams were suiting up. The MPs looked terrified. "Commander Crestford," Zandria called out, approaching the sealed door. "It's Zandria." Silence. Then, the heavy click of the electronic lock disengaging. Zandria pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it immediately against the chaos in the hall. Eldridge was sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked terrible. Pale, sweating, his hair matted to his forehead. But his eyes were clear. He held a metal scalpel in his hand. Stolen, she realized, from her cart during the chaos of the night before. "You look like you're about to be court-martialed," Eldridge said, his voice rough. "Fired," Zandria corrected, leaning against the door. "Until you decided to stage a mutiny. I told them I'd rip out my IVs and walk out of here on a broken leg if they didn't send you back," Eldridge said, tossing the scalpel onto the tray table with a clatter. "Stonecliffe wants a puppet. I need a teammate." Zandria walked over to him. She didn't check the monitors first. She checked his eyes. "Teammate?" "You caught me," he said quietly, the memory of the night terror passing between them. "You didn't run. You caught me." "I'm on probation," Zandria warned him. "One mistake, and we're both done." Eldridge gave a grim, tight smile, the first she had ever seen. "Then we better not make any mistakes. Ops start now. We do this my way. No drugs. Hard PT. I walk out of here in 2 weeks, or I die trying." The alliance of room 404 shifted the atmosphere of the entire Ravenwell wing. It became a bunker, a sovereign state within the hospital, where Dr. Stonecliffe's orders were treated as advisories rather than laws. Monday morning brought the arrival of Isoria, the lead physical therapist. She was a tall, athletic woman with braided hair and a no-nonsense attitude that rivaled Winifred's. She wheeled a cart of weights and resistance bands into the room, eyeing Eldridge like he was a broken engine she intended to rebuild. "I heard you eat therapists for breakfast, Commander," Isoria said, snapping a resistance band to test its tension. "Good thing I'm not edible." "I don't need rubber bands," Eldridge grunted, trying to shift his position. "I need to weight load." "You weight load now, you shatter the graft," Isoria said, pointing a finger at him. "We start with isometric activation. Nurse Vance, stabilize the knee." Zandria moved into position. For the next hour, the room was filled with the sounds of strained breathing and the gritting of teeth. The pain was visible on Eldridge's face, a white, hot agony every time he tried to fire the atrophied muscles of his quadriceps. "Again," Isoria commanded. "Fire the quad. Hold it. 5, 4, 3. Eldridge was shaking, sweat dripping from his nose. "It won't engage." "It will," Zandria whispered, her hands firm on his knee, feeling the tremors. "The connection is there, Ridge. Find it. Visualize the nerve. Send the signal." He looked at her, his eyes dark with frustration and pain. He was a man who could hold his breath for 4 minutes, who could carry a rucksack up a mountain, but he couldn't lift his heel an inch off the bed. "It's dead," he rasped, dropping his head back against the pillow. "The leg is dead." "The leg is sleeping," Zandria corrected immediately. "And we are going to wake it up." She moved her hands to his ankle. "Push against me. Come on, push." "Vance." "Push," she ordered, her voice sharp, channeling a bit of the drill instructor tone she imagined he responded to. Eldridge glared at her, a spark of anger igniting the fuel he needed. He gritted his teeth, a guttural growl rising in his throat. He pushed. Zandria felt the pressure, weak, fluttering, but there. "I feel it," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "Isoria, look, the VMO muscle, it's firing." Isoria leaned in, nodding in approval. "We have ignition. Good work, Commander. That's enough for today." As Isoria packed up, Eldridge lay exhausted, chest heaving. But the despair that usually haunted him post-therapy was gone, replaced by a simmering exhaustion. Zandria grabbed a cool cloth and wiped his forehead. He didn't flinch away this time. He closed his eyes, leaning into a touch. "You have a sister," he said suddenly. Zandria paused. "I do." "How did you know?" "I heard you on the phone in the hallway yesterday. You were talking about tuition." He opened his eyes, looking at her with a clarity that was unnerving. "That's why you take the hazard pay. That's why you put up with Stonecliff." "She's brilliant," Zandria said softly, rinsing the cloth. "She wants to be an architect. She designs these incredible structures, safe places. I promised our mum I'd make sure she got to build them." Eldridge watched her. "You're the shield," he murmured. "You take the hits so the civilians can build." "Something like that." "I had a team," Eldridge said, his voice dropping an octave. 6 men. We were the shield, and I let them walk into a trap." Zandria stopped moving. This was it, the breach in the wall. "Intel said the building was clear," he continued, staring at the ceiling tiles. "It wasn't. The floor was rigged. 2 dead. 3 critical. And I woke up here. It wasn't your fault, Ridge," she said, the platitude tasting like ash. "Fault is irrelevant," he replied coldly. "Responsibility is absolute. That's why I have to get out. I have to know who burned us. The intel was too wrong. It wasn't a mistake, Andy. It was a setup." Zandria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "A setup?" "Someone fed us bad coordinates," he whispered. "And I think the rot goes higher than the field." The door opened, and Stonecliff walked in, cutting the conversation like a guillotine. "Excellent progress reports from physical therapy," Stonecliff said, his voice oily. "But your inflammatory markers are up, Commander. I've ordered a new IV drip, just a vitamin cocktail to help with tissue regeneration." Zandria watched as Stonecliff hooked a yellow bag to the stand. Eldridge went rigid, his eyes locking on the bag. "I don't need it," Eldridge said. "Mandatory protocol for inflammation," Stonecliff insisted, opening the valve. "Doctor's orders. Rest now." He left. Zandria watched the yellow fluid drip into the line. She looked at Eldridge. He looked heavy, his eyelids drooping almost instantly. "Vitamins don't make you sleepy," Zandria whispered to herself. By Wednesday of the 2nd week, Zandria noticed a pattern. Every time Eldridge made a breakthrough in PT, every time his strength improved or his memory of the mission became sharper, Stonecliff would appear with a supplemental treatment. A new pill, a different IV bag, a modification to his diet. And every time Eldridge would regress, He would become lethargic, his speech slurred, his coordination shot. The nightmares would return, vivid and terrifying, leaving him exhausted and pliant. It was 0300 hours on a Thursday. Zandria was on the night shift again. She sat at the nurse's station, staring at the digital chart for patient 404. Medication list: ceftriaxone, antibiotic, enoxaparin, blood thinner, multivitamin complex B. It looked standard, boring even, but the effects were not standard. She looked around. The hallway was empty. The MPs were dozing in chairs at the far end. Winifred was on break. Zandria opened the secure drawer where the pharmacy tech dropped off the nightly meds. She found the vial labelled multivitamin complex B, intended for Crestford's morning drip. She held it up to the light. The liquid was a slightly different shade of yellow than the standard complex she used for other patients. She shouldn't do this. If she was caught, she would lose her license. She would go to jail. She pulled a syringe from her pocket and drew 1 cubic centimeter of the liquid from the vial. Then she injected it into a test tube she had swiped from the lab cart. She capped the vial and put it back. She ran the sample down to the automated pathology lab in the basement. As a nurse, she had access to run blood panels. She scanned a dummy barcode she used for calibration tests and loaded the sample. Analyzing. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. Result: benzodiazepine derivative, high concentration, unidentified synthetic compound detected. Zandria gasped. It wasn't vitamins. It was a high-grade sedative mixed with something else, something akin to a hypnotic or a memory suppressant. Stonecliffe was drugging him. He was intentionally keeping the commander weak, confused, and docile. Why? Because he knows too much, a voice said from behind her. Zandria spun around, dropping the printout. It wasn't Stonecliffe. It was Winifred. The older nurse stood in the shadows of the lab, her face grim. Winifred, I was just... You were running a tox screen on the chief's personal cocktail, Winifred said, stepping into the light. She didn't look angry. She looked resigned. You aren't the first to notice, Vance. But the last nurse who asked questions about the vitamins didn't get transferred to Alaska. She had a car accident on I-95. Zandria's blood ran cold. He's poisoning him. He's managing him, Winifred corrected. Stonecliffe isn't just a doctor. He's a contractor. The Admiral, he needs Crestford to be unreliable until the investigation into the mission is closed. If Crestford testifies that the intel was bad, heads roll at the Pentagon. If Crestford is a raving, PTSD-riddled junkie who can't remember his own name, the mission gets written off as fog of war. They're gaslighting him, Zandria whispered, horror dawning. They're destroying his mind to cover up a mistake. And now you know, Winifred said, which means you have 2 choices. You can walk away right now. I'll delete the log. You go home to your sister, you keep your head down, and you live. Or you go back up there, Winifred said, her eyes hard. And you start a war you probably can't win. Zandria looked at the printout on the floor. She thought of Eldridge pushing through the pain, trusting her when he trusted no one else. She thought of him calling her his teammate. She bent down and picked up the paper. I'm not leaving him, Zandria said. Winifred sighed, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a key card. This opens the service elevator. It bypasses the cameras on the 4th floor. If you're going to break him out, you can't do it through the front door. Break him out? Zandria blinked. He can't walk, Winifred. Then you better teach him fast, Winifred said, because the Admiral is coming back on Saturday, and Stonecliffe plans to up the dosage on Friday night. If he gets that next bag, he might not wake up the same. Zandria nodded, pocketing the card. She ran back to the elevator. When she entered room 404, Eldridge was awake, staring at the window. He looked groggy, the previous dose still in his system. "Andy?" he mumbled. Zandria moved to the bedside. She took the IV line, the one scheduled for the morning, and clamped it shut. "Wake up, Ridge," she whispered, grabbing his shoulder. "We have a problem. The intel, it's not just bad. It's here. The threat is inside the wire." Eldridge blinked, fighting the fog. "What?" "Stonecliffe," she said, leaning close to his ear. "He's the one suppressing you, and we have 48 hours to get you combat ready." Eldridge's eyes cleared. The haze burned away, replaced by the cold, lethal focus of a predator who just realized the cage door was unlocked. "Sit rep," he commanded, his voice steady. "We are behind enemy lines," Zandria said. "And we are leaving." The next 36 hours in room 404 were a blur of calculated agony and silent rebellion. Zandria Vance had ceased to be a nurse. She had become a co-conspirator in a medical insurgency. The strategy was simple, but dangerous. Zandria swapped the tainted IV bags for saline flushes she smuggled in her pockets. She falsified the charts, recording administered doses that went straight down the sink drain. But the hardest part wasn't the deception. It was the withdrawal. Eldridge's body, conditioned to the high-grade sedatives Stonecliffe had been pumping into him, rebelled violently. He shook with tremors that rattled the bed frame. He sweated through his sheets every hour. His temper, stripped of its chemical dampener, returned with the force of a hurricane. I can't focus," Eldridge growled on Thursday night, gripping the trapeze bar above his bed until his knuckles turned white. "It feels like my skin is on fire." "It's the washout," Zandria said calmly, wiping his face with a cool cloth. "Your receptors are screaming for the drug. You have to ride it out, Ridge. You have to hold the line." She didn't pity him. Pity was useless here. Instead, she pushed him. "Physical therapy," she announced at 0200 hours, locking the door. "Get up." "Are you insane?" Eldridge gasped. "I can barely breathe." "If you can't walk by Saturday, you're dead," Zandria said, pulling the wheelchair away from the bed. "Stonecliffe isn't going to wheel you out of here. He's going to wheel you to a long-term care facility where you'll drool on yourself for the next 40 years. Is that the mission objective?" Eldridge stared at her, hate and respect warring in his eyes. "You are brutal, Vance." "I learned from the best," she retorted. "On your feet, Commander." For 2 nights they worked. Zandria used her body as a crutch, bearing his weight as he dragged his reconstructed leg across the linoleum. It was ugly, sweaty, desperate work. He fell twice. Both times she didn't call for help. She simply waited for him to curse, breathe, and pull himself back up. By Friday afternoon, the tremors had subsided into a low-level hum of anxiety. But his mind was razor-sharp. He was remembering details, coordinates, time-stamps, the face of the intel officer who had briefed him. "It was a lieutenant commander," Eldridge whispered, staring at the wall map Zandria had drawn on the whiteboard. "Name of Thorne. He gave the clear. He said the building was cold." "Thorne," Zandria memorized the name. "We can look him up." "No," Eldridge said, his eyes darkening. "If Thorne set us up, he didn't do it alone. Stonecliffe is the handler. Ravenwell is the architect. We need to bypass them all." The door handle jiggled. Zandria kicked the whiteboard eraser, wiping the name Thorne away, just as Dr. Stonecliffe entered. The surgeon stopped, sniffing the air. He looked at Eldridge, who was feigning sleep, and then at Zandria, who was checking the monitors. "He looks restless," Stonecliffe observed, stepping closer to the bed. He checked the IV bag, the decoy saline bag Zandria had hung. It was empty. The sedative should have knocked him out hours ago. He has a high tolerance, Zandria lied smoothly. Metabolism of a seal. Stonecliffe narrowed his eyes behind his rimless glasses. He reached out and checked Eldridge's pulse. It was bounding, strong, not the slow, thready pulse of a sedated man. "Draw blood," Stonecliffe ordered sharply. Zandria froze. "Sir?" "I want a serum level check," Stonecliffe said, turning to her with a predatory stillness. "I suspect absorption issues. Draw the blood, Nurse Vance." "Now, I'll wait." The air in the room turned to ice. If Zandria drew the blood, the lab would show 0 traces of the sedative. The ruse would be over. Stonecliffe would call security, Zandria would be arrested, and Eldridge would be chemically restrained within 10 minutes. Zandria walked to the cart. She picked up the tourniquet and the needle. Her hands were shaking just a little. She looked at Eldridge. His eyes were open just a slit, watching her. He knew. She had to create a diversion, a catastrophic one. "Doctor," Zandria said, turning back with the needle in hand, "before I do this, did you authorize the change in his antibiotic protocol?" Stonecliffe frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The chart." She pointed to the tablet on the counter, stepping away from the bed. "It says you switched him to levofloxacin, but he has a documented allergy." "I did no such thing," Stonecliffe snapped, distracted. He marched over to the counter to look at the screen. As he turned his back, Eldridge moved. It wasn't the graceful, silent movement of a healthy operator. It was a lunge of desperation. Eldridge sat up, swung his good leg off the bed, and grabbed the heavy metal IV pole. Stonecliffe sensed the movement and spun around. "What are you—" Eldridge didn't have the leverage to swing it. Instead, he shoved the pole forward like a battering ram. The heavy base slammed into Stonecliffe's chest, knocking the doctor backward. Stonecliffe tripped over the waste bin and crashed into the glass supply cabinet. The noise was deafening. Glass shattered. Stonecliffe hit the floor, dazed, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Code Grey!" Zandria screamed, slapping the emergency button on the wall. Not the medical alarm, but the security threat alarm. "Room 404, hostile in the room." "What are you doing?" Eldridge hissed, trying to stand, pain etching deep lines into his face. "Confusing the narrative," Zandria said, rushing to him. She grabbed his arm, hauling him up. "If we leave now, they'll think you attacked him in a psychotic break. They won't look for the blood test. They'll just look for a target." "That's a bad plan," Eldridge grunted, leaning heavily on her. "It's the only plan," she shot back. "Winifred said the service elevator. Go." They made it to the door, just as the MPs at the end of the hall started running towards them. "Halt!" one of them shouted. Zandria didn't halt. She shoved Eldridge into the linen closet next to room 404, slamming the door behind them, just as the MPs sprinted past, heading into the room where Stonecliffe was groaning on the floor. "In here," she whispered, fumbling for the back of the closet. Winifred had said there was a laundry chute access panel. "I am not," Eldridge gritted out, "going down a laundry chute." "It's a service corridor," Zandria corrected, pushing a panel aside. "It leads to the loading dock. Can you walk?" Eldridge looked down at his leg. The bandages were straining against the swelling. The pain was blinding, a white noise that drowned out everything else. "I can walk," he lied. He stepped through the panel. The loading dock was cold, smelling of diesel and rain. The service elevator had deposited them in the bowels of the hospital, away from the sterile VIP wing. But they weren't out yet. "The Admiral," Eldridge said, leaning against a stack of pallets, his breathing ragged. "He lands at Andrews at 0800 tomorrow. He'll come straight here." "We can't wait for him here," Zandria said, checking her phone. No signal in the basement. "We need to get to a federal building. The FBI. Someone outside the Navy chain of command. No, Eldridge shook his head. If I run, I look guilty. I look like the broken, unstable asset Stonecliffe painted me as. I have to stand my ground. I have to face Ravenwell. Eldridge, you can barely stand, Zandria argued. If Stonecliffe finds us. He won't, a voice echoed from the shadows of the loading bay. Winifred Hale stepped out from behind a delivery truck. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing a trench coat and holding a set of car keys. Winifred, Zandria breathed. Stonecliffe is screaming for a lockdown, Winifred said, tossing the keys to Zandria. He says the patient kidnapped you. He's authorized lethal force, if necessary, to secure the asset. Kidnapped? Eldridge let out a dry, dark laugh. My car is in spot 4B, Winifred said efficiently. It's a beat-up sedan. No one looks at it. Get him out of here, Vance. But don't go to the FBI. They'll just hand him back to the Navy. Where then? Zandria asked. The Officers' Club, Eldridge said suddenly. Ravenwell is holding a press briefing there tonight, before he visits me. He's announcing the success of the mission cleanup. Winifred nodded slowly. Public, smart, hard to assassinate a man on live TV. Go, Winifred urged. I'll stall them. I'll tell them I saw you heading for the roof. Zandria hugged the older nurse fiercely, then helped Eldridge into the passenger seat of the sedan. The drive to the Officers' Club was a nightmare of adrenaline and pain management. Zandria drove with one eye on the rearview mirror, expecting black SUVs at every turn. Eldridge sat in the passenger seat, pale as a sheet, manually compressing his leg to manage the throbbing. They arrived just as the press vans were setting up outside. The club was a stately brick building, guarded by Marines in dress blues. They won't let us in, Zandria said, looking at Eldridge's hospital gown tucked into stolen scrub pants. We look like fugitives. Eldridge reached into the glove compartment, where Zandria had stashed his uniform blouse, snagged from his closet days ago. He pulled it on. It hung loose on his frame, but the ribbons on the chest, the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, commanded instant authority. Help me out, he commanded. Zandria supported him as they walked toward the entrance. Every step was a battle. His face was grey, sweat dripping from his nose. Halt, the Marine at the door said, stepping forward. Sir, this is a closed event. Eldridge straightened up. For a second, the pain vanished, replaced by the sheer force of will that made him a team leader. I am Commander Eldridge Crestford, he barked, his voice cracking like a whip. And I am here to debrief the Admiral. The Marine hesitated, looking at the ribbons, then at the desperate, ferocious eyes of the officer. He stepped aside. They walked into the ballroom. Admiral Falcon Ravenwell was at the podium, bathed in the light of camera flashes. He was a silver-haired hawk of a man, speaking smoothly about heroism and sacrifice. And though Commander Crestford remains in critical condition, his bravery is right here, Eldridge's voice boomed across the room. The silence was absolute. Every camera turned. Eldridge stood at the back of the room, Zandria a step behind him. He looked like a revenant, gaunt, scarred, holding on to consciousness by a thread. Commander? Ravenwell froze. You should be in the hospital. I was, Eldridge said, limping forward. The crowd parted. But the treatment plan was counterproductive. It seems Dr. Stonecliffe was more interested in erasing my memory than healing my leg. He stopped 10 feet from the podium. He swayed, and Zandria stepped in, her hand on his elbow to steady him. The coordinates for the extraction were compromised, Admiral, Eldridge said, his voice amplified by the stunned silence of the room. Lieutenant Commander Thorne cleared a building that was rigged to blow, and for 3 weeks I have been drugged to keep me from asking why. Ravenwell stared at him. Then he looked at the cameras. He looked at the reporters frantically typing. The narrative was broken. The cover-up was shattered. "Commander," Ravenwell said, his voice tight, "this is a medical emergency. You are clearly delirious." "I have never been clearer," Eldridge said. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, the tox screen printout Xandria had saved. "Benzodiazepines, hypnotics, not vitamins, administered by your chief of surgery." He held it up for the cameras. "I am reporting for duty, Admiral," Eldridge whispered, his strength finally failing. "And I am filing a formal complaint." As his legs buckled, Xandria caught him. But this time she wasn't alone. Marines from the detail rushed forward, not to arrest him, but to catch a falling hero. Admiral Ravenwell stood alone at the podium, watching his career dissolve in the flashbulbs. 6 weeks later, Xandria sat on a bench overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. The wind was cold, but the sun was bright. A figure approached, leaning on a cane but walking with a steady, rhythmic gait. Eldridge Crestford wore civilian clothes, jeans and a leather jacket. He looked healthier. The hollows in his cheeks were gone. "They indicted Stonecliffe this morning," Eldridge said, sitting down next to her, "and Ravenwell was forced into early retirement." "And you?" Xandria asked. "Medically retired," he said, tapping his cane. "The leg will never be 100% for combat. But I can walk. I can run, eventually." "I'm sorry," she said. She knew the teams were his life. "Don't be." He looked at her. "I was fighting for the wrong things. I thought the mission was everything. I forgot that the mission is about the people beside you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a badge. It was her hospital ID, tape gleaming on the plastic. "I pulled some strings," he said. "Your termination was expunged. You have a job offer at Walter Reed, head of trauma nursing." Xandria took the badge. "And what about you? What does a retired SEAL do?" Eldridge smiled, a real one this time. "He builds things, safe places. Maybe he helps an architect's sister get a scholarship. And maybe he takes a very brave nurse out to dinner." Xandria looked at the badge, then at the man who had survived the impossible because she refused to follow the rules. "I get off at 6, she said. "I'll be waiting," he replied. In a world that often demands blind obedience to authority, the story of Xandria and Eldridge reminds us that true duty is not to a protocol, but to the human being in front of us. Integrity often requires the courage to break the rules when the rules are wrong. Xandria didn't save Eldridge with medicine alone. She saved him with the radical act of listening to him when the world wanted him silent. We must all be the shield for those who cannot stand for themselves. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, courage, and justice, please like this story, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more compelling tales of heroes who fight back against the odds. Your support helps us tell the stories that matter.